beginning to show up for work, huh?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, it's 8:30. We're going to be very close to starting. Hillary, I'll look for you to give me a yes or no.
Can you
Okay,
hear me?
yes. Okay, I'm going to go. Good morning, everybody. I'm going to start the meeting now. I hope everybody has had a safe and healthful week. I'm going to start with the call to order, a roll call of the board members, and you can obviously test out your mic as I go through the roll call. I'm going to start at the top. Director Perotti.
Here.
Director McQuarrie. Unmute yourself, Chuck. You're muted again. You did it twice. There you go.
Okay, I'm here.
Great. Director Weinberg. Unmute yourself, Dick. Good.
Here. I'm here.
Good. Director Rodriguez.
Here.
Excellent. Director Sheeler.
Present.
Vice Chair Tabor.
Here.
And Chair Davis is here. So we all members are here today. Could I have the report regarding the posting of the agenda, please?
The agenda was posted on Friday, August 28th at 2020 at MTD's administrative office, mailed and emailed to those on the agenda list, and posted on MTD's website.
Great. Thank you very much, Christina. That takes us to the consent calendar. There are two items. The first is the approval of the minutes for the meeting of August 4th, 2020. And item 5, the cash report for the period July 11th through August 21st, 2020. Are there any questions or comments on either of those two items? Bill?
Thank you, Chair. Two questions. One of them has to do with the BYD Motors, the capital lease payment of $31,625. And just wondering how much longer we'll be in a lease mode on those remaining buses. And then the last one has to do with the payment to the Santa Barbara News Press for public notice ads, and just wondering if the district has explored alternative ways of public notification. Thank you.
Mr. Estrada?
Yes, on the first matter, I'll have to get back to you on the exact term with the BYD Motors. It's going to probably be at least through another 8 to 9 years, as long as we keep the fleet. And then on the second matter, we're required to advertise in a essentially a publication, general circulation. So we've historically used the news press, but we used others as well. And we'll certainly look at our options, but it's yeah.
Okay. Any other questions?
Mr. Chair,
Go ahead, Mr. Tabor.
I'll be abstaining from the minutes since I was absent for that meeting.
Okay. Let's take two separate motions and let's start
And Chair
with,
Davis,
yes,
we do have a public comment for this item as well.
on the consent calendar.
Correct.
Okay, let's go to public comment before we look for a motion. Mr. Green, if you're there, or if you can unmute Mr. Green.
I have been unmuted now. Thank you. I would like to address the lack of ability to comment on the director's report, number 9. I raised my hand. The video or the minutes will reflect that they moved directly into a closed session meeting. So there was no item 10 before the director's meeting and closed session. How can one comment if you in essence close the meeting to the public? We don't know how to get back in. So I think this practice needs to be addressed. The questions that I had were relating to the operations and the lack of detail in the March. Someone said, in August, someone said it was a special meeting, but I believe that is one of the 2 meeting dates a month. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your comment. I think it was a special meeting because normally we are dark in August, which is a simple answer. And on the other item, we did come back into regular session and it went back onto YouTube, and it was publicly available at that point in time. But the comment is noted, and we will talk about that, how we proceed in the future. Okay. Any other questions on the either consent calendar items? Okay, let's just do a motion on the consent calendar. Is there a motion on the consent calendar?
Motion to approve.
Second.
I have a motion by Prodi, second by Rodriguez. I'll do a roll call vote, okay? And Prodi, Director Prodi,
Aye.
Director McQuarrie,
Aye.
Director Weinberg,
Aye.
Director Rodriguez,
Aye.
Director Sheeler,
Yes.
Vice Chair Tabor.
Abstain,
Okay, on both items or just on the one item?
just on the minutes.
Okay, and Chair Davis is yes on both items. So the consent calendar is completed. Takes us to public comment. Do I have a public comment? Is
No
anyone?
public comment at this time. Oh, I do see a hand from Mr. Howard Green.
Yeah, okay. Mr. Green, you were there. You want to unmute Mr. Green and we will hear from him.
Hi
Go ahead,
again.
Mr. Green. Go ahead.
Hi again. Thank you. The general comment is that the number of buses that are going by with use following bus is increasing. I think that that should be a part of the general manager's report each month. Just like in regular times, your quarterly report shows information about two-fold aboard and so forth. I think we deserve that information now. I also would like to ask that the operation of the booster, meaning extra runs on scheduled service, not student service, be described. How many buses go out, what times of day, what lines, so we understand what the service levels requirements are. End of comment.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Green. That concludes public comment. That will take us to our first public item of item 7, Public Transportation Agency Safety Plan. Mr. Estrada, you want to introduce this?
Yes, thank you, Chair Davis, members of the board. The Public Transportation Agency Safety Plan is a federal requirement for all transit grantees throughout the country. It's been about 2 years in the making, and we've been very fortunate to have our director, excuse me, of Human Resources and Risk, Mary Gregg, our Chief Safety Officer, to really lead the charge on this. She's done a great job, and she's here today to present the item for you. So, Mary, it's all yours.
Good morning, Mary.
Great. Good morning, Chair Davis. Good morning, members of the board.
morning.
I'd also like to say a good morning to Mr. Paredes and Ms. Latiero and Mr. Andrade of EasyLift, who have joined us today, as well as SB CAG listening in on today's presentation. So thank you very much. We'll jump right in. Next slide, please. Okay. We have a full agenda here today, but a lot of this we're just going to touch briefly on. So we're going to cover where we are today, which is that we have an agency safety plan that's been written and it is completed. It's part of your packet. What our next steps are in the timeline to kind of cross the finish line, if you will, with the administrative piece of this process. I'm going to touch just briefly on PTASP, kind of go over just a few items, what the purpose of it is and its primary components, just as an overview. And then we're going to really kind of get into the heart and soul of what we're here today to talk about, which is safety management system, how EasyLift fits into that model, MTD safety performance targets, and how those are integral to the planning process with other beyond our own agency. And then the heavy lifting, which is really the implementation of all of this, and then what we're going to do every year thereafter. And then we'll end with Q&A. Next slide, please. Okay, so where we are today, I am very pleased and relieved to be able to present to the board a completed agency safety plan. It has gone before the FTA Technical Assistance Center for review. And I'm just really thrilled to be here. As Mr. Estrada mentioned, this has been about a 2-year journey. This is the administrative side, really, of the Transportation Agency Safety Plan. The plan itself builds upon the existing foundation of MTD safety practices and all the training that we already have in place. But there were a lot of unknowns to get here today. You know, the FTA implemented this final rule, and then over the course of the time, the FTA had to kind of look at industry-wide how to bring all of this together. And in fact, just this last February of 2020, the FTA put out a template for us to use to kind of have the framework of all of this. And that's what you see today in the agency safety plan. So thank goodness we're here, we're all together. But again, the plan itself is completed. So next slide, please. All right. So our next steps on our timeline, really we're 90% across the finish line. What we're going to be doing in this next month is working with EasyLift on their safety management system documentation. You're going to see a lot of acronyms throughout the agency safety plan, and SMS is one that is we're going to be using quite a bit. So EasyLift will be part of our agency safety plan as an addendum to that. And I'll talk a little bit further about that as we get into the presentation. So we've been working with EasyLift. They're in the loop on all of this. And we have essentially a game plan in place moving forward with their operations team to develop their SMS framework and bring it all together. In October, once that's completed, we'll go back to the FTA. They have what's called a technical assistance center, and they allow a voluntary review. Now, this doesn't necessarily check off all the boxes saying that you're compliant. That's something that we have to do. MTD certifies our own agency safety plan. But they go through the checklist, and it's really helpful because they provide comments back to areas where you can enhance your plan or where there's some suggestions. So as I mentioned earlier, we've gone through that voluntary review. When we pull in EasyLift's SMS framework into that, then we'll go back to the Technical Assistance Center for another review. And then we're in the home stretch. This is the easy part. Our accountable executive, our AE, which is Mr. Estrada, our general manager, signs the agency safety plan. Staff will be back in November to present it to the board of directors again and for your approval. Next slide, please. So then in December is when the compliance deadline is. Now, originally, when PTASP was first put out as a final rule, it was in July of 2018. It became effective in July of 2019. And then the original deadline was July 20 of 2020. And the FTA extended that deadline under the circumstances related to the pandemic to give all the agencies an opportunity to be able to be compliant. So December 31st is our deadline, and we are definitely on track to make that deadline. We'll go through a certification process through our annual certifications and assurances. And then after that, we'll be coordinating our safety performance targets with SBCAG. And then we provide Caltrans a copy of our agency safety plan. They also need our safety performance targets. And again, I'll explore what all of that is a little bit further into the presentation. Then in January, that's when the heavy lifting really kind of begins. We will have completed the administrative piece of all of this, which again is the agency safety plan. And then we get into the implementation of the safety management systems. Again, I want to emphasize that safety management system implementation is building upon a platform that MTD already has in place. We are taking our existing processes and policies and procedures, and the SMS is the framework by which we're building upon that. So next slide, please. All right. So PTASP. I think we have a, can you go back one slide, Pablo, do you mind? Yes, there we go. Thank you very much. So just briefly, I just wanna, we've talked about Public Transportation Agency Safety Plan, or what we've been calling PTASP for quite some time now. The background on it is that Congress required operators of transportation systems who receive certain FTA funds, in this case 5307 funds, to develop an agency safety plan. And then the FTA put out their final rule, as I mentioned, in 2018. And essentially, it's how the FTA is requiring agencies to implement this. And it provides an opportunity for transit in general to have a common language. So the framework of all of this and the why of it is so that we are speaking the same terminology. Next slide, please. So MTD is by definition under PTASP and also under the TAM plan, Transit Asset Management, defined as a small public transportation provider, which is 100 or fewer vehicles in revenue service. And that's across a specific mode. So we are a directly operated fixed route mode service. And so we fall just below the 100 vehicles in peak revenue service. Now the large operators, large public transportation operators, have to work within the same framework of PTASP. They just have a few other requirements as a large provider. And then PTASP also includes rail transit, but not under the small definition. So next slide, please. All right, so there are three main components to the final rule. So PTASP as itself, we're calling the final rule. And what's combined in all of that is the agency safety plan. That's the administrative side of it that we were talking about. And as you can see, we've developed that. We're gonna cross the finish line with approving it, certifying it, and then we get into the implementation. Effectively, the heart of PTASP is the safety management system. And the four components, or the four pillars, as they're known, to SMS are the policy, the risk management, the assurance, and also the promotion. So we're going to explore that a little bit further today, because that's really what we're here to talk to today, is the safety of this system. And then the documentation, again, on the administrative side of things, how we maintain the agency safety plan, what the requirements are on an annual basis, and the documentation that we make available to the FTA through the triennial review. Next slide, please. All right, so this is the heart and soul of PTASP. There are four main pillars, as I just mentioned. The safety risk management, you have safety management policy, you have the assurance, and then you have the promotion. Now, all of this is very flexible and scalable to the organization. The FTA, again, put terminology in place so that across the board, transit agencies were speaking the same language, kind of an apples to apples, if you will. And so each one of these categories, MTD has developed their agency safety plan according to what works for our transit agency. So on the left-hand side of the screen in the first box, safety risk management and safety assurance, what you see there are the action items. These are the key processes and activities for actually managing safety. And then on the right side of the screen, the safety management policy and the safety management promotion, these are the enablers. These are the things that provide the structure and the framework to support the activities and make it really possible and sustainable. So risk management, we are looking at identifying hazards, we're assessing those hazards, we're making a determination on how to mitigate those and how to prioritize those. I think a good example, which is one that's common in the transit industry or something that is certainly something that we have here from time to time, is right side mirror. I've used this example before. If we're traveling down a street and there's a tree branch that hasn't been trimmed on whoever piece of property, and there's a right side mirror that hits the tree branch, we take a look at identifying how that happened, why it happened, and then we mitigate for that. And we may be knocking on the property owner's door and asking them to go ahead and trim the tree branch. So that's a pretty straightforward example of what we're doing when we're looking at risk management. Now, risk management across the top ties with the safety management policy. It's our commitment to our goals in safety. So it really sets the tone. So those two really have a nexus with each other. And then from there, the safety assurance, again, how we mitigate it, how we measure it, and how we monitor it. And then once that framework is all put in place, how do we promote it? And again, these are live action items on the safety promotion. These are the things that we'll be doing as part of the implementation, communicating all of our risk management and assurance, and the training that we do that comes out of that. We can go to the next slide, please. All right. So with safety management systems, we have those in place with our agency safety plan. And the next piece of it for us, again, on the administrative side, is to be working with EasyLift in order to get their documents and everything attached with ours. And the reason for that is because EasyLift, under the definition of PTASP, is a contractor. And that's basically an external service provider who's providing services to the transit agency under a contract. And so MTD is responsible for ensuring that the contractor, EasyLift in this case, that their SMS processes and procedures are referenced in our agency safety plan and ensured that they're being followed. Next slide, please. All right, thank you very much. So before we move on with the safety performance targets, I wanted to give Mr. Paredes an opportunity. He indicated that he would like to make a statement to the board.
Good morning, Mr. Paredes. If you're there, unmute yourself or unmute him. Good morning.
Good morning, Chair Davis. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes, sir.
Great. Well, thank you. And good morning to the members of the board. I wish I could be there. I'm sure we all wish we could be there together, but this is the way it's going to be for now. I also want to thank given the opportunity to speak on this behalf. I have to just say that this, like Jerry was saying earlier, we've had a heads up, so to speak, about 2 years ago. This is massive legislation. And I just have to give both Jerry and Mary tremendous credit to be able to take that information and really give it to us all in bite-sized pieces so that we can really understand it. Because Mary went through it just now. And again, it is so complex. I tip my proverbial cap to you, Mary. So thank you for all that you're doing. This for us, we are very excited and happy, not to always have regulation, but in this case, safety targets and performances is our speak. I mean, we are safety geeks over at Easy Lift. And it's something that we look forward to improving our service and anticipating issues that may or may not come up. I think generally in transportation overall, we do a great job at responding to issues, but in this case, not only will we be improving our response, but we'll be improving anticipation and preparing so that some of these things that can happen don't happen. And again, I give a lot of credit to the relationship that we have with MTD to be able to do this fairly seamlessly. I have tremendous amount of confidence in our team to execute these requirements. And again, I also want to thank our Director of Operations, Christina Laterio, Renee Andrade, who you all know, who is our operations manager, who just really, take this very, very seriously and work really well with Mary. So with that, that's what I will open it up to any comments. But my last comment I do want to make, which is a more of a Easy Lift personal note. A couple months ago, one of our longtime board members, where many of you had met and know, who was also a former chair of our board, Mac Johnson, passed away of cancer. He was a tremendous mentor to me. He had huge, someone that I looked to in many ways, and he's very dedicated to Easy Lift, and looked out for us in many ways. So I just want to commemorate and think about Mac Johnson today.
Well, thank you for that, Ernesto. We're sorry to hear about Mac's passing, and he was a great asset to your organization. And I know that I'd like to thank you and your staff for the cooperation and assistance in the preparation with Mary. Are there any questions or comments for Ernesto, Mr. Paredes at this point from other board members? Okay, not seeing any. Again, Ernesto, thank you again for the cooperation, and we will, look forward to completion of this plan. Oh, wait, I do have a question. Mr. Sheeler, Bill.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, Mr. Paredes.
Good morning.
Let me see if I can read this correctly here. It's scribbled. I'm just wondering, does MTD have any liability if there's a non-certification of our contractor/partners plans? Do we have any liability when that is submitted and it doesn't meet the federal criteria for certification? Or do we ensure that it meets the criteria for federal certification before it's submitted?
Jerry?
Yeah, Ernesto, I'll go ahead and take this, and Mary, correct me if I'm wrong, but the way the FTA has constructed this particular policy is through self-certification by the grantee, which is MTD. So it's our responsibility to make sure that they're complying with the processes that they've laid out, that they lay out for us, et cetera. So I think that answers the question. It's typically how the FTA handles most of these matters is through self-certification. They'll come in every 3 years during a triennial review and assess the work that we're doing together and let us know if there's any area where we can improve.
Okay, if I could just follow up on that, how would MTD ensure that Easy Lift policies that are self-certified are being followed? Or is this something that we've kind of been doing all along, so this really isn't a big change?
Mary, if you'd like to maybe use the drug and alcohol program as an example of how we work together.
Absolutely, that's an excellent example. So Easy Lift is required to participate in the FTA's drug and alcohol testing program for the same reasons that MTD is required to do so. So any safety sensitive employee has to be participating in the drug and alcohol program start to finish. So the FTA comes in on a triennial review, and which they have done with MTD, and they've looked at our drug and alcohol program, and we've passed it through the certification and whatnot. Easy Lift follows the exact same process. So I work a lot with Ms. Latierio, which Mr. Paredes just mentioned, Christina, the operations manager there. And so while they are managing their own program, MTD is responsible for ensuring that they are compliant with that program. So all of their documentation, all of their testing documentation, their new hires, all of that information comes over to MTD into the risk department, and we audit all of that paperwork and we combine it within our system so that when the FTA comes out, all of that is available. And I'll go one step further on that. That also includes the CHP. So we just recently had a CHP audit, and all the drug and alcohol aspect of MTD as well as Easy Lift were reviewed as part of that. I hope for Director Sheeler that answers your question as an example. And I can certainly explore a little bit more in the Q&A section. We're just a couple slides till we finish with that, and then I can answer that a little bit more in depth. Just to tie it back together, the key here under the final rule, under the PTAS final rule, is to ensure that each agency, small, large bus operator, and rail, have a safety management system framework in place. And the administrative side of that are all the boxes that get checked within the agency safety plan. And the FTA provides a checklist for us to go through to make sure that we have all of those components before we self-certify. But PTASP and SMS is really scalable and flexible. The FTA looks to your plan and your SMS for what works for your organization. So as an example, safety performance targets. The agency itself sets what their safety performance targets are. And those safety performance targets, the framework for that are based on the National Safety Plan and what we report to the National Transit Database. So the flow of information to the FTA is already happening outside of this actual plan. Easy Lift also presents their, also reports to the NTD every month as well. So in setting safety performance targets, we look at that information over a 5-year period, and it's really where we want to go. Now, the FTA doesn't come in on a triennial basis and say, hey, you didn't meet your safety performance targets. What they do is they say, oh, you either met or you exceeded your safety performance targets. That's great. Your SPTs, we call them. It's that it's in the framework of the agency safety plan. And the goal here in this is that this is a living document. We are always looking at what's in it, which is why there's an annual review required. So it's a constant process here. So again, part of the certs and assurances process is where we're looking at Easy Lift's SMS in coordination with ours as a whole package. And so with that, once we set these safety performance targets, we also share them with our MPO, which is the Metropolitan Planning Organization here for Santa Barbara, which is SBCAG. And we also share that information with Caltrans, and they integrate it into their own planning documents in order to set investment priorities. So there are lots of moving pieces and lots of us in the industry talking to each other with this. Next slide, please.
Great. Before you move on, are we done with questions for Mr. Paredes? Okay, Ernesto, thank you very much for being here today. And again, thank you for the partnership that Easy Lift does with MTD to provide our service. Okay, go ahead, Mary.
Great, thank you. So we're coming to the finish line, the proverbial finish line for now. As I mentioned, the administrative piece of it, the heavy lifting up to here, we're almost done with. And then what we'll be looking to in January, again, I want to reiterate, we come back to the board in November. We adopt the plan, and then we start implementing our safety management systems. We are developing a rollout strategy for that, as well as agency-wide communication. We'll be coordinating with key stakeholders in that. That's across the board with everybody here within the MTD organization. You know, safety is everybody's responsibility here. We wake up thinking safety, we leave work thinking safety, we think about safety on the weekends. I know I do. So across the board, we all have responsibility. So we coordinate with everybody here within the organization, including the board, on what our implementation will look like. We have a lot of training here in our organization, starting from the moment of hire, ongoing refreshing training, but we will take a deep dive and really evaluate the training needs for each role and responsibility specifically. We'll also initiate an employee safety reporting program. This is part of the requirement of the agency safety plan and what that will look like. The details of a lot of this that we already do and that we will be doing are in that 19-20 page agency safety plan document that was part of the staff report. And so there's more in depth on what an employee safety reporting program looks like. But it's essential to all of this, and it's going to be a key piece that we roll out, because the information that comes out of that is all of that data that's coming back for us to analyze. And you see that word a lot. We have a lot of analysis that we are going to be doing in the first year. We're going to be looking at existing processes and resources. What's our documentation and our record keeping? How do we bring it all together within the different departments so that there's a systematic wide documentation here that we're using as our jumping off point to evaluate where we go from here, essentially. And so the first year is going to be a lot of review of data, continuous collection of all of that, and analysis of information. And I guarantee you there are going to be a lot of spreadsheets in my future. All right, next slide, please. Okay, so every year, the FTA requires that we come back to the board with our agency safety plan to approve it every year. So this is outside of the triennial process. And again, this is an internal process where we self-certify each year that our agency safety plan has been reviewed. And because this is a living document and something that we're supposed to be looking at throughout the course of the year, living and breathing, there are three main things that we look at. Does our agency safety plan that we have today address all of the relative requirements of the PTASP regulation? And I can say yes, but there may be changes that happen in PTASP. FTA is continually evolving this final rule and the different aspects of it. So if there are changes with the final rule, then MTD will follow along and we will put all the relevant requirements into that plan. The big question here is, each time we look at this, is does it reflect how we're operating today? Services change, routes change, different types of modes change. We've talked a lot about the future of on-demand with microtransit. So that would be something that we would need to incorporate into our agency safety plan. And then finally, the activities and processes that are described in there. Is it what we need, basically, at our transit agency? We may finish doing a gap analysis of our processes and our training and say, hey, we want to add something. We find a need in this one area, maybe for the maintenance department to enhance the monthly toolbox talks that they're doing. So as you can see, this is a very in-depth study throughout the entire year of what this agency safety plan looks like. But again, that's the administrative part. That's the actual document, the safety management systems. And what we do here every day at MTD is really kind of the heart and soul of what the goal of Public Transportation Agency Safety Plan is all about. So with that, that concludes my presentation. If we can go to the next slide. Questions?
Perfect. Well, Mary, before we get to questions, I just want to just say wow for the board. An incredible work effort in a complex subject matter, which the feds gave us marching orders that basically we had to stop everything and jump into it. So for me personally, just thank you and everybody who assisted you in getting this to this point in time, and look forward to moving forward. So great job. Great job.
Thank you very much. As I said, it's a pleasure to be here today to present this to the board. It's a great relief to me on a personal level, because there's so much that was unknown leading up. Like I said, the FTA is still changing things. And then also on behalf of MTD, I'm excited by what I've encountered through this process and the confidence I have that MTD has so many of these things already in place, that this process is just basically, I shouldn't say basically, this process is putting common terminology to what we're already doing.
Yeah, it validates a lot of the great efforts which are ongoing. Really great job. Okay, board, questions and comments. Okay, I see one hand, Bill, and then Dave. Go ahead, Bill. Unmute yourself.
Thank you, Chair. First, I want to thank Mr. Estrada for being so astute and hiring Miss Gregg. And I want to congratulate her on this remarkable achievement. 2 years is a long time. I have a series of questions, so bear with me. This is a very complicated topic, and there's a lot of detail underneath each of these bullets. So I am pretty ignorant, and so I'm just trying to look at this as globally as I can. Regarding the ASP and the annual review, is that ever shared with one of the board's HR subcommittees, or does the board ever have any review of any of these annually?
Yes, we will bring it to the board on an annual basis, and that's certainly something that we can explore a little bit further on what that process looks like, because this is a relatively new setup for us.
Well, I think if possible to just, I know there is like a subcommittee that may be able to even get more into the detail, provide kind of just a sharing with the board. I think it's important for the board, now that this has come forward, to be understanding of this as much as possible. My next question has to do, how does this weave into our future audits? Because I guess anybody who's coming through and auditing us will be looking at this, and this adds a new level of detail and complexity.
Yeah, I can answer that. I think we mentioned with the federal government transit association, they'll come in every 3 years and do their triennial review. CHP may take a look at it on the annual basis as well. And then our single audit, which is a financial audit, also looks at controls and also looks for compliance with any federal or state government type of requirements. So they'll probably have to incorporate that. And I think it's still unknown. We'll see when we go next year, once we have the plan in place, what it is they think they need to do. And it may take a few years to get the guidance from the FTA for them.
Okay.
And if I could, I'll also add to that what Mr. Estrada was saying about the FTA. They are still in development stages of what will actually look like in their triennial review on this process. So that is an ever developing checklist, if you will.
My next question has to do with the PTASP and our designation as a small public transportation provider, and the potential for the new census to move us into a different category, and how that would affect the PTASP and the district's agency safety plan.
So I'll go ahead and take that, Jerry. So under PTASP, the definition for the small and the large provider is specific to your actual mode of operation, and currently does not reflect the population within which you operate. It is specific to how many vehicles you have in revenue service at peak time. So if you have 101 buses in one mode of operation in peak revenue service, then you're considered a large operator. So for MTD to move into a large operator category, that would be what the litmus test is, not with the census or the population.
Thank you for explaining that. I was definitely off on the wrong tangent on that one. My next one is, I guess, okay, is there any consideration of a national safety management system so that transit agencies can identify potential personnel issues before they occur? Some people might have records that aren't so stellar and coming from areas where there might not be clear reference information. And is there any consideration of a national safety database like they're considering doing for other public safety entities?
Go ahead, Mary.
Okay, great, thanks. There is, so as I only very briefly touched on in the presentation, there is what's called the National Transit Database and National NTD, excuse me, National Transportation Database. And that is a warehouse of information, if you will, for agencies across the country to report on a monthly basis the main categories that are defined in the National Public Transportation Safety Plan, which is called the NSP for short. So there is information that's available to us. We can look at the NTD database. It's public information. You can go online and Google it, and you can see what other agencies across the country, small, large, similar operations, and how they're doing. The one thing that I think is great about PTASP and the final rule, one of the things, is that it really brought together transit agencies for this question specifically. You know, we're an industry, we're public, we're always sharing information back and forth. We're picking up the phone. If, you know, we want to revise an incident or an accident report, all we need to do is pick up the phone and do a reach out to agencies across the country, and we share information and we build upon the successes of what other agencies are doing out there. So this kind of community of practice that's come out of PTASP is quite positive, again, because we're all speaking the same language. But there are also the organizations out there like APTA, who now have incorporated into what they're providing to us different training models and different pieces of information that are being reported to them. So the short answer is yes, there's a lot out there for us of information.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Bill. Mr. Tabor?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just have a couple questions. You mentioned, Mary, that we're close to that threshold of 100 vehicles to be considered a small agency. Is there any chance our implementation of microtransit affecting that designation?
That's a great question. It's a different mode of operation. So at this juncture, the FTA says no, it wouldn't. But there's always the possibility that could change.
Understand that. Next, regarding safety performance targets, how are they selected? Is that something handed to us by the feds, or do we put those numbers on the page?
MTD establishes their own safety performance targets. So what we did was, and again, this is, each agency can look at how they want to define this. And these are targets. So I want to reiterate, these are kind of our goals, if you will. So what we did is we did a 5-year look back at what we reported to the NTD on the main categories that are required for the SPTs, and took an average of that based on a certain amount of vehicle miles. And we'll be working with EasyLift to look at what their historical information is to get some averages from them as well. So we decided that a 5-year time frame was the best look back. That's the time frame which we report information to the board on our quarterly reports regarding all of that information. So that was the snapshot we wanted to use.
Thanks for that. Last question. The last column under performance targets, system reliability. What does that mean?
The last column on which part of the presentation, if you don't mind, we'll go back to that slide real quick. You want to look at the safety management system framework?
Under section 6, safety performance targets in the staff reporter, and there's a last column. There's you have fatalities, injuries, safety events, and then you have system reliability.
Oh, gotcha. In the actual agency safety plan, system reliability. That's a maintenance safety performance target, and that's related to the amount of miles we're setting before we have any kind of a road call, if you will. 8,000 miles before we have any kind of a breakdown in service with one of our physical vehicles.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Good. Other questions from the board?
I have one.
Go ahead, Chuck.
Actually, a couple. Well, I'll just reflect what Bill said. How lucky we are to have Mary, because when I first saw what this requirement was, I wondered how in the world we're going to handle it. But as usual, Mary, you did a great job. Looking at our current operations, every day at the conclusion of a run, usually the drivers fill out a DDR. How is the safety program going to affect that, or will it? Like when a driver comes in and reports something that conceivably could be a safety issue, how's that going to be handled? Any different from the way it is now, or how's that going to work?
Well, I think specific to the driver's daily report, that's specific to the different routes that they're taking. And so if a driver comes back and says, so through the employee safety reporting program, whatever the various ways are that information comes back to us from, if one of those is through a DDR, if a note is on the DDR, or drivers say comes to me directly, or to Mr. Bill Morris, our manager of operations, and says, look, every single day I'm encountering a pothole on this section. While the route may not change as part of the DDR, we'll identify that piece. And then if there's something long-term that's a challenge with the actual route, could require a service change. So that's definitely communication that would go forward from operations to our planning department for evaluation.
Okay, thank you. And then when it gets down to departmental ways to handle safety issues, whether it's in operations or maintenance or wherever, if a department head makes a rule that perhaps the safety committee doesn't agree with, can you as a safety officer effectively overrule what the department head may have in terms of, what is a safety issue?
In the sense of the framework of what we've created, that would be the foundation from which any of those decisions are made. But the chief safety officer and the accountable executive are the driving force behind ensuring that everything is in place and changes are made accordingly. Mr. Estrada?
Yeah, I can assure you the answer is yes, and the chief safety officer would have full support of the general manager to do so.
Okay, good. That's good to hear. Now, another thing is in terms of budgeting, are we going to track this, or is it going to be a separate line item? Or, it sounds like it's just going to be another unfunded mandate. Are we going to track what the additional costs are for implementing this safety program?
Yeah, I'll take that one. I mean, the reality is it's something we do every day and already within the agency.
Right.
And what we're taking on, and essentially through this new effort, it's significant, and we're going to have to adopt our budget accordingly. Do we need to track it specifically? I don't believe so. What we need to do is make sure we invest sufficient resources that it gets done. And I was actually going to finish with that once we're complete with questions.
Okay, and then my last question is, and I think I already heard the answer, is on the triennial review or with the CHP reviews, whatever is determined in their findings, we will then, I guess, be required to update our program.
Absolutely.
I figured that was going to be the answer, but I just had to ask it.
Yeah.
Okay. Again, I'm just so impressed with the way this has been handled. So, my plaudits again go to you and Mary and whoever it was that worked with her on this. It's quite a job.
Great. Thank you very much. Okay, are there other questions from the board? Okay, so Christina, are there any public comments, any hands raised for this?
We do have a hand raised for Mr. Green. I'm allowing him to talk now.
Okay, Mr. Green, unmute and you may go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I think this is an amazing document and the staff did a great job. I suspect that the templates didn't raise the question of public aspects of the safety reporting program. You already get feedback from consumers. I think they go mostly to a marketing department, but some of those may in fact be appropriate in your safety program. Also, signage on the buses and in the transit guide would be an appropriate vehicle for alerting passengers to the safety plan. I think that many of those things are covered in the current standard operating procedures, but I think should be reflected like page 11 of the packet material talks about the employee safety reporting program. And I think the same kind of information should be developed for passenger or just general citizen input. Thank you.
Good. Thank you for your comment. Okay, this is a presentation only item. Are there other board questions or comments at this point before we close the item? Director Perotti, Paula.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to echo what my colleagues have already said. Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Jerry. As Ernesto said, it helped us. You did put it into bite-sized pieces that we could, I could understand, because it was a massive undertaking, and I really appreciate all the hard work, and thank you.
Okay, then I'll go to Jerry and Mary for any closing comments from staff.
Yeah, Mary, if you have anything, I'll finish up.
No, I think I've said enough for today.
Yeah, I'd just like to wrap up by, acknowledging Mary's work here. It's been tremendous. She really stepped up to the plate to get this done for the agency. And as we've discussed privately, we're crossing one finish line and then getting started all over again. And it's going to be a team effort. We're going to need everyone to really buy into this. I think we have the team to get it done. In November, when we come back for adoption, I will have to make probably some organizational adjustments in order to empower us to get this done so that it's clear. As I think Director McQuarrie pointed out, it has to be clear chain of command as far as it pertains to safety. And if a rule is put into place, what's going to happen from there. So that'll be coming. We're going to need to really put some resources behind it. It comes at a difficult time financially with the pandemic, but this has to go to the top, and it always does, and it will continue to do so. So I'm just giving you a heads up, probably by the end of the year, you'll hear more from me about how we're going to go about implementing this and how we were going to support that effort. And again, I think for what people maybe aren't aware of, Mary did all of this at the same time with dealing with the pandemic.
Yeah.
She was really on track to get this done by July, and then the pandemic hit. And she's the person I've turned to help us get in line with that, make sure we're compliant. Mr. Morris, Mr. Moss, many others also helped to get us to the point where we feel we've done everything we can to mitigate COVID-19 for our employees and our customers. But behind the scenes, Mary is really the one that was taking the lead with the facilities and everything else. And it's been an amazing piece of work, and I think it needs to be acknowledged.
Yes. Wow. That's all I can say. It's been an incredible effort. Go ahead, Olivia.
Chair.
Go ahead, Olivia.
Thank you. I just want to echo everyone else's comments and thank you, Mary. I had to do a safety plan about 20 years ago for a company that had like 20 roll-offs, and oh my God, that was a nightmare. And so I can't, this is amazing. So thank you very much. It's a work, it's a living document, correct? How often will we go back? Did you say 6 months, a year? When do we continue to renew it or look at it again?
Well, we're required, the FDA requires us to do an annual review. So at a minimum, it'll be an annual review. But as you said, it's a living document. This is the heart and soul of what we do here. So as we're living it, we'll be evaluating it, we'll be analyzing it. It's a very, very data-driven system. And so through all of that, we'll make necessary adjustments and changes as we see them throughout the year. But the administrative part of it, the actual agency safety plan, anything in that document, will come before the board annually.
Okay, thank you. Also, I'm wondering, should we have a subcommittee on safety just to meet once a year, twice a year? Anybody interested in something like that? I mean, I know Mary is doing a great job and the whole board, everybody there, but I don't know, I kind of think it would be nice to have some support from the board or some input, or at least us kind of see where things are going. That's just a suggestion.
Jerry.
Yeah, I think you'll be reassessing your standing committees at the end of the year, right around the same time, probably the same board agenda when we bring this matter back for adoption. So maybe when we bring the plan back for adoption, you can consider that, because that's exactly when you'll be doing your committees.
Well, can you put that down? Because I'm not sure we'll remember that, but can you?
Oh, yeah, we will. Yeah, we'll actually have the plan on the agenda that day for adoption. So it'll be back in front of us. Good timing.
Okay, wonderful.
Great timing. Good suggestion. Great timing. And Mary, we'll see you in November.
See everybody in November. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks again for the great presentation and all the work. Okay, and we'll move us on then to item number 8 on our agenda. This is the Driver Barrier Contract Award. Mr. Estrada, Jerry.
Yeah, thank you. I'll go ahead and handle this one for us. The driver barrier contract, MTD staff is recommending the award of the driver barrier contract to Complete Coach Works. This would essentially allow us to put barriers in place to protect our drivers on all of our Gillig and Nova fleet. This is consistent with what we shared with the board and the public when we covered our COVID-19 recovery guidelines as one of the key steps for us. As you may remember, we're currently still boarding passengers through the rear door. At some point, we would like to get to the point where we're boarding from the front and collecting fares again. We think this is a precautionary step that we need to take in order to do that. This contract award will allow us to move forward in that direction so we can get it done. Staff has conducted its sole source assessment of this, done a price analysis. Everything seems to be in order. It certainly qualifies for CARES funding reimbursement. So with that's our recommendation, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have regarding the project.
Okay, pretty straightforward. It's the emergency measure. We're asking for sole source on the item itself. Are there questions from the board? Chuck?
Yeah, just does this mean that we're going to start collecting fares again?
Once this is installed and we're satisfied with the project, that is our goal that we laid out in the recovery guidelines.
Does it change anything about the way we do transfers?
No, it wouldn't, it shouldn't affect that at all.
Okay.
Bill?
What about the BYDs?
BYDs, we board in the rear, from the rear door normally, and the fare box is already there, so that shouldn't be a factor. We wouldn't have to, we don't need the barrier for that.
Jared, just on that point though, if you're, again, just for driver protection, no need for that?
We don't believe so, but it's certainly something we can reassess.
Other questions from the board? Not seeing any. Do we have any public comment on this item, Christina?
There is no public comment on this item.
Okay, this is an action item. Is there any comments, Bill, or can we go to a motion? Okay,
I
no,
move
no.
for approval, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, Dave. Say it again.
I make a motion to approve this item.
Okay, Tabor for approval. Motion to approve. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Director Prodi has seconded it. Okay, we will do a roll call on that. We'll start again with Director Prodi. Director McQuarrie. You're muted, Chuck. Raise your hand and I'll recognize you. There you go. He voted yes. Director Weinberg.
Yes.
Thank you. Director Rodriguez.
Yes.
Director Sheeler.
Yes.
Vice Chair Tabor.
Yes.
And Chair Davis votes yes. The motion was approved unanimously. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Strada, for the presentation. Moves us directly into item 9 then, the General Manager's Report. The floor is yours, Jerry.
Yeah, I'd like to start with the ridership results to date. The average weekday ridership versus prior year, you see the chart that we shared with you in the board packet. And the good news is that you see the return of ridership. It's a slow, steady return. We're just at about 7,000. We're averaging about 7,000 rides per weekday. Historically, during when schools are all in, UCSB, City College, et cetera, we're at about 27,000. During the summer, obviously, it's a little bit less. We're about 64% as of through most of August at this point, as far as our performance. A couple of other data points aren't really here, but when it comes to the boosting, we just haven't had enough drivers to really do much of that over the last couple of months. So there really hasn't been as much of the boosting. We are leaving people behind, unfortunately. So again, this really makes the issue of the maximum passenger occupancy restriction a key issue for us, and doing what we can to mitigate the spread of the virus on board the vehicles is going to be anywhere in the fleet was critical to us going forward and the entire industry. At some point, we're going to get enough ridership back where it becomes a problem for us, where we just don't have enough drivers or buses. So we're doing what we can on the hiring side to bring more drivers in. We've had some success recently with that, so we're going to continue down that path. Another big milestone for MTD is the transit center project. We're at a point now where we've got employees back in the building, and probably by the end of this week, we'll have vehicles back in the circle as we free up some of the space along Figueroa and Chapala Street. We're going to keep a couple of the bus stops there. The city's approved a permit for us to extend that through for another 6 months or so. Due to the pandemic, we still want to keep people spread out to a certain extent. But the good news is we'll start using the outside of the circle. We still will not use the inside of the building. We'll wait until we're collecting fares again, because as you can imagine, we're going to have to do a lot of work to control that, how many people can be in the building once we get to that point. Another project that was recently completed is the Chevy Bolts for our relief vehicle fleet. The charging infrastructure was completed here at this facility. The Bolts are now in operation. Our employees are using them, so that's really exciting for us. Another step forward in our goal. And also along that line, we're going to come back at the next board meeting, at least it's our plan, with a discussion about Southern California Edison heavy duty charging infrastructure grant application. We've been working closely with them on the planning side. We think we have a project that would do well for their essentially their grant opportunity. And it's exciting. We're looking forward to bringing that to you hopefully in 2 weeks. That concludes my report. Chair Davis, I think you're muted.
How'd you notice? The moving lips. Chuck?
Just a question. Now that we have the electric staff cars, what do we do with the old cars that were here?
We still have them for the moment, but we'll start planning on disposal.
Thank you.
Great. Good. Bill?
Thank you, Chair. Regarding the too full to board, this is an issue for transit districts around the country with the necessary physical distancing. And I've read about some transit districts that have software that gives them the ability to push out information that the upcoming bus will be too full to board and that there will be another bus coming in X amount of time. Is that something that's possible to explore that the Trapeze or whatever the software package is could consider?
We can certainly explore it and take a closer look, see if we're capable of doing that with our clever device system. And we'll do so. One of the things, I'm glad you brought that up for us, is it's a real issue for transit operators like MTD that serve universities and community colleges. So you're smaller than the bigger cities, but you have high ridership, student ridership in particular. And communities like ours have been talking about this, and it's a real challenge for us because once schools do start reopening partially, if that ridership starts to come back, it's going to put a strain on our system probably faster than a lot of other essentially transit operators and maybe in a more rural community. So there's a difference, and it's something we're going to try to get in front of, but it's going to be a challenge, to be honest with you.
Thank you. And my last question for the general manager, is there any update on the Kyriel project?
I was going to just make the note that the RFP did go out in mid-August. And so we're in the solicitation process right now. Jerry?
That's what I was going to say. We're in the middle of the solicitation process, so I probably won't comment much on it till we get further along.
Thank you.
Okay, I just wanted to make a comment that to Ms. Blackerby, Hillary Blackerby, that the PR, the information that went out on the electric service vehicles was a really great job. Excellent marketing in terms of getting that message out to the community. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair,
Go ahead.
quick question for the director. I saw a staff training vehicle on the road yesterday. Is DMV back up and running and helping us out with getting the licenses?
Yes, to an extent. You can understand the challenges the DMV is having, just like every other business. It's difficult to get an appointment for commercial licensing, but we are pressing forward. We've had some success that we hadn't for months, and we're hiring, and we're just going to stay persistent on that front. So.
Okay.
I have one more question.
Go ahead, Chuck.
I read where the new service has been implemented for August. I don't know what kind of change there is, but is there going to be any changes to the bus book, or how's the public going to be made aware of any changes to the existing service?
I'll go ahead and hand that one off to Hillary to answer.
Sure. Chair and Director McQuarrie, those changes were made as of August 17th. We did put out a new bus book, and also all the updates are made on our website. So those went out. Most people are getting the information online, but the bus books are on the buses.
Oh, okay.
And so that's basically how they're available at this point. But the changes have been, they went off okay. Obviously, it's a little early to say how things are looking as far as on-time performance and stuff like that, but they went all the information went out as normal, and I think it's going okay.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, if there are no other comments, we'll go to item 10, other business and reports. We did mention the Kaya Real, so that's a little bit been covered. Is there anything else related to public transit or committee meetings from anyone? Okay, go, Bill.
I just had a question. When is our next meeting of the board?
2 weeks from today. In fact, I was going to close with that we will be meeting 2 weeks from today. Okay. Well, Jerry, thank you. Thank you and all staff for the presentation today. It was everything very informative and on the safety plan. And thank you for moving ahead on the driver barrier contract as expeditiously as you have, because we do need to get back to collecting fares as soon as we can. So if there are not any other comments, do I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Nobody wants to second it. Okay, Dick Weinberg seconded that. All those in favor, raise your hand. Okay, we stand adjourned. Thank you again, Jerry. Thank you, everybody. Have a good week.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
We'll see everybody in 2 weeks.
Thank you.